Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I got one. Summer 2006. Year after Hurricane Katrina. New Orleans was broken, a lot of neighborhoods were badly flooded, the houses needed to be torn down and rebuilt, they were too far gone. My group of friends and I were graduating high school and heading off to college in the fall. Doing what high school kids do before they go off to college, hanging out drinking. One of my friend's parents' house was in one of the badly flooded areas. The house was abandoned but still had electricity running to it. All the street lights were damaged and didn't work, and the neighbors had left too. Naturally, this was one of the spots we would gather and act a fool. The upstairs had a large room where we brought keyboards and musical instruments where we would jam. Anyway, one night we decided to gather at the house. This night was really dark and foggy. The fog was thick and blanketed the neighborhood. Extra creepy. There were about 9 or 10 of us, 4 or so girls and the rest guys. We always entered all stealthy and kept quiet for the beginning just to make sure we were the only ones and no curious cops or whatever scoping us out. Get inside, head upstairs. We are drinking some beers, shooting the shit. Alcohol hits the bladder after a while, time to piss. Head downstairs. Most of the interior lights were damaged, so I grab a flashlight. Pissing in the bathroom under the stairs. Feels good. Finishing up and I hear a muffled noise coming from a corner room of the ground floor. It can't be my friends, I was right under the stairs and would have heard someone come down. I hear another noise. I cut off the flashlight. I am not alone down here. Quietly peer around the corner and look into the kitchen. I see trash littering the floor. It's new, not brought in by the storm. We didn't really mess around on the first floor, and there's a bunch of stuff out of place. Something isn't right. I had a knife on me, and after the incident in this story I damn near always make sure I carried one after that and whipped it out. The downstairs bedroom has dirty mattresses and bent spoons, what looks like old dried blood smeared on the wall, brown and fetid. I distinctly hear footsteps, this time nearing my location. Wheel around to my left side. There's a dirty-looking girl standing in the doorway, couldn't have been much older than me. We both scream. I draw my knife holding at arm's distance. She's saying, "We don't want to hurt you. We don't want to hurt you," over and over. My fight or flight reflex is kicking in hard. A guy emerges from the shadows. He was shorter than I was, but wiry muscles, long dirty hair that obscured his face. Tattoos all over, wore dirty all black clothes. Being in his presence literally made the hair on my body stand on end. Scary dude. He doesn't say anything. "Don't come any closer or I'll stab you," I say. Girl looks nervous, the dude does not. I back out of the room, keeping the knife pointed. Run upstairs. All my friends are high, drunk, oblivious to the situation downstairs. They were jamming on the instruments, didn't hear anything. I'm trying to spit out what just happened. People downstairs, creepy people, we need to get out of here. Girls are laughing. No one believes me. Nice try, dude. You're going to have to try harder than that. Haha, you're just high, have another beer. As I'm getting more and more pissed, we hear footsteps coming up the stairs. The room goes silent. The girl and the evil dude walk into the room. The girls with us scream. "See, I told you I wasn't lying." Kind of funny looking back at that moment. But now we are stuck upstairs with these people blocking the exit. Nowhere to run. The girl is repeating.
"Don't call the cops, we don't want to hurt you."
Scary dude says nothing. My friend who owned the house says,
"Get out of my house."
Scary dude pulls out a grimy scalpel from his pocket.
"You don't want to do that."
The only thing he said during the entire encounter. I have the knife extended at him. Grimy girl starts pulling on the dude.
"Come on, let's go."
Guy glares at us for another 10 seconds or so, felt like an eternity. He puts the scalpel in his pocket and walks downstairs without saying a word. We look out the window and see the duo disappear into the fog. We went downstairs to investigate. We found bent spoons, empty syringes, 5 grimy bare mattresses, 9mm bullets, hobo food like Chef Boyardee, a lot of dirty panties. A map of the New Orleans area with 10 or so places circled in red. Several Louisiana driver's licenses, over 10 of them. Dried bodily fluids on the walls, assumed it was blood. We didn't touch anything. My friend told his dad about the incident and called the cops. The cops said that some of the people in the driver's licenses had been missing since around the time of the storm. The dude we met that night was up to something. We never returned to the house. They bulldozed the house soon after.
Be a fresh minted 18-year-old. About a year after Katrina. Visit uncle and aunt in Louisiana. Nolans to be exact. Out after dark like a tourist dumbass. No guide. No weapons. No clue how much danger I could be in. I guess I figured after 18 months in an MMA class I was Billy Badass enough to handle anyone who crossed my path. I found out how wrong I was in a hurry. Walking through the French Quarter and coming upon an outdoor cafe. Stop and try to read text messages on the old Virgin mobile pay-to-play phone. See guy with dark hair, tied back, open-collared shirt, leaning back in chair as he watches people going by. Looks very content and relaxed, nostalgic and pale. Takes a hip flask out and pours dark liquid into a coffee cup on the table. I initially assume bourbon or wine. Lifts cup and tips it in a salute. Grins and flicks his tongue on his canine/incisor whatever. They were oversized but not like Christopher Lee Dracula fangs. More like Avril Lavigne's. Before she got them redone or whatever. But sharp and prominent. Get this sudden loud clear thought in a mental voice not my own. Fear not, I'm rather full and content on this beautiful night. But you should be running along little ones. The mosquitoes are quite ravenous after dark ever since the storm. Take the 2-shoe express back down to Rue Bourbon until I find a landmark I know and call my uncle. He sends a good buddy, Mr. George, to fetch me and bring me back to his place. I broached the subject of the pale guy with Mr. Gurge as we drove and he almost ran off the road. Told me I was very lucky, that New Orleans had many things in it that were old and dark. Things had been dug up by the hurricane.
I live in New Orleans. Born and raised in Louisiana. It's always been a hotspot for the paranormal. Voodoo, witchcraft, hauntings, vampire legends, bayou werewolves, etc. Anyway, due to the quarantine situation, the city has been pretty much a ghost town, hardly anyone out and about. I've been going stir-crazy being stuck inside because I battle depression and anxiety. So, we have started to go on morning walks around the city daily. We may occasionally pass someone, usually walking their dog or riding a bike, etc. Well, today felt different. I have extremely pale skin, the fairest type you'll ever see. So my whole life I've been compared to Snow White and to, of course, vampires. Well, at one point during our walk we were about to cross the street and on the other side was a man looking to cross to our side. I had the strangest feeling that he was going to think I looked like a vampire because I was wearing a black dress and my pale skin is as pale as ever. I don't know why I felt that way, but I tend to have a very strong intuition. Example, the other day I pre-adopted a rescue kitten at PetSmart. I bought a pink carrier, and when I got in the car I strongly felt the need to keep the receipt in case the cat isn't really a girl. That night I get a call from the foster mom who says she's sorry that she told me it was a girl, and that they went to microchip her and it's a boy. But back to my story. So as I'm thinking about how I look like a vampire and about to cross paths with this man, the sun hits me as I cross the street and he lets out the largest wolf-like howl that I've ever heard coming from any creature in my entire existence. The weirdest part was, I didn't feel afraid. And I didn't feel like it was strange. Maybe the weirdness of New Orleans has gotten to me, or maybe it's because I know deep down I've believed all along that everything is not as it seems, and that legends and stories exist for a reason. I calmly crossed the street and never looked back. I just hope I'm safe now. I wonder if he picked up my scent. Of course, New Orleans also has a lot of homeless people, mentally ill and drug addicts as well. So it's possible he's just one or more of those. But maybe not.
Okay, here it goes. I have a medical background and a certification I rarely use, though I keep going back and paying to renew it. Anyhow, I volunteered almost immediately thinking I would help those who have lived through Katrina. That was not the case. There were a few of us who were assigned once the water started to recede, to find houses that had dead bodies in them. If you've ever had to do a body recovery when it has been lying around in the heat and the water for days, sometimes weeks at a time, you know how it smells. It sort of smells like any other dead carcass but worse. I can't explain it, maybe somehow, sweeter smelling. Anyway, the key to not vomiting when you smell them is Vicks VapoRub in, under, and around the bottom of your nose. It doesn't keep all the smell out, but enough until you can at least tolerate the smell without vomiting. We had to go to each house and go inside in wading boots and look for bodies. Many of them washed out to sea, but some were still in the houses they had lived in prior to the hurricane. If we found a body, we spray painted a big X on the outside of the house. This other guy and I had been doing it for a while and we got assigned to each other almost every day. We got along okay and he didn't vomit at the ones that had been gotten to. We came up to this one old shack. I say shack because it was pretty run down and in what had been a very bad neighborhood. Right away, I got chills down my spine. I knew there was something really wrong. Not like finding a body kind of wrong, but chilling kind of wrong. New Orleans has certain areas that just give off these vibes, and my understanding is there is a lot of voodoo practiced in certain areas. Anyway, against everything my body was screaming at me, we went into the house. The first thing I could smell was a body, the second was something almost earthy and mold. I looked at my partner, I will call him Jay. He was white as a sheet. I could tell he was getting that same feeling I had been getting. It was obvious from the weird bones hanging from the ceiling, would bet money they were cats. Something odd had been going down in the house as well as strange beads and carvings in the bare wood in the walls. We went into what was a kitchen and there chained to a beam was an old lady or what was left of her. She had chained herself by her wrists to the beam, her guts were falling out on the floor. The creepiest thing was her face still looked as though she were alive and staring at us with a wicked smile showing only partial teeth. They were nubs. My skin started crawling as the goosebumps spread over my body and my neck hair stood up. Suddenly, I heard the most unearthly cackling noise I have ever heard in my life and my flight kicked in. Jay and I noped out of there. We quickly painted the X and literally ran to the next house. Now I don't know if that old lady had practiced voodoo or whatever, but that scared the ever-living shit out of me. It still gives me nightmares. The people I feel sorry for are the ones who had to take that crazy lady out of there. Jay and I discussed it that night after we went back to the hotels north of there. He had heard the cackling too, but we both said it had to be the wind or something.
I'll try to be brief. I didn't really ever want to post this, but 15 years later this still haunts me. My now deceased ex had an affinity for New Orleans. I haven't been back since his death, not that I didn't share some of his fixation with the city, but I've had too many strange encounters here and honestly, I don't feel safe going back. The night of this encounter, we hadn't been drinking at all. That needs to be clear with the location. He was a big guy, 6'4" and full of muscle. We were just taking a stroll after the street started to quiet down. I remember everything being a normal walk until after we passed Ursuline Convent, heading back toward the river. I am normally spot on with directions, but something about New Orleans makes me lose my bearing and I rely on landmarks. Just after we crossed the street leaving the corner of the convent behind us, I noticed it became eerily quiet. Not something that happens there, especially as people stumble to their hotels. He also noticed something because he gripped my hand quite hard and picked up pace. He had a strange look to his face as I struggled to keep up, and he was taking odd routes. Finally, I caught what was making him act bizarre. I followed a split-second glance of his to a building. The best I could say, it looked like a dingy pale Spider-Man going up the side of a building. I remember him harshly whispering not to look, to just keep moving. He was taking us to Bourbon Street where there would hopefully be more people. But this was off-season and midweek, so there were less people. And even less than I would have expected. Time seemed to stand eerily still, as if time had stopped except for us and it. I looked about 2 blocks later, and it was on the roof, clearly tracking something that I prayed was not us. The silence was truly deafening, as my adrenaline was going, and I think I tuned out more sounds trying to escape being prey. This thin, humanoid, which was defying gravity, freaked us out badly. We made it to the hotel, with my last memory of a glide being just before the house where the supposed vampire brothers lived and disappeared from. I think it was the most harrowing experience I've ever had, and there've been a few close calls in my life. I know it's a quirky city with plenty of the fantastical, but this was like we were in another dimension that was the French Quarter. It's something that is, to this day, still frightening to me. We were completely sober and just out for a romantic stroll, in a city we had a connection with. That thing, shudder, I can't escape it, even over time. My boyfriend had said little about it, he was even more disturbed by this than I was. He refused to say anything other than corroborating what I saw, and that it was going on longer than I knew. It had come from a house away from us when he first noticed it. It's worth noting that before this, we had gone to listen to Johnny Gordon at Lafitte's. Drank regular soda. I needed to tie my shoe right across the street and something bit his leg, 2 decent puncture wounds, maybe half an inch apart on his calf. We brushed it off as maybe he bumped into something and didn't notice, then took our stroll. They were deep though, to not notice, but it is whatever it was. It left no strange overtones to us. The city streets took a weird vibe that night. To be honest, it left a huge spooky shadow over all my memories of our beloved quarter. He's not around for me to ask more, so I'm asking if any of you have encountered anything like this there too.
Note, the witness stated later, referring to the puncture wounds.
We were honestly never able to get any concrete diagnosis, and there were extensive tests along with visits to specialists. He was only 37 and started with fatigue and heart palpitations and edema in his calves, to the point of actually convincing him to go to the doctor. I want to say within 6 to 8 months after this occurrence. He passed just shy of 3 years ago. We used to go out there so often that it became more feasible to have our own place there, as it was every 2 or 3 weeks out there for a long weekend. I think I said though, this was pretty much our last time there. Maybe there was one other trip to gather our things out of the home.
I want to convey my experiences while working in the vicinity of the Louisiana Superdome, now known as the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. I have worked in the warehouse in the Superdome as well as a steward in the Hyatt Regency across from Champions Square. I held these jobs between 2006 through 2014. As you may remember, more than 40,000 people took shelter in the Superdome during Hurricane Katrina in August 2005. Though it was a refuge of last resort, the conditions were horrendous. I was told that only 5 people died there during the storm, but I know that many more died from the effects of that hellhole. There was death throughout the city. A few people I knew were never seen again. I can safely say that the area in and around the Superdome is haunted. The management of the facility and other businesses around it are acutely aware of the paranormal activity. Security personnel are a revolving door. They rarely stay longer than a few months. The smell of death and filth still permeate the air in parts of the Superdome. One late evening, I was walking from the loading dock to Garage 5. I was approached by an older man who asked me if I could sell him a cigarette. I told him that he was trespassing, but he gave me no reaction. Then suddenly, he turned and faded away. I mentioned this incident to my supervisor, who just shrugged his shoulders and said that it wasn't unusual. I later saw the same man walking around different areas, but only for a matter of seconds before he faded away. I have heard babies and children screaming and crying, but have never seen anyone. I can attest to the fact that the Superdome has been blessed by several voodoo priests and priestesses. I believe the pain and suffering experienced during Hurricane Katrina are now a part of the structure. I was also told that the Superdome was originally built on top of old graves and that the angry spirits are now going to seek justice. I don't know how true that is, but it's something to think about. The Hyatt Regency has also experienced various activities. One of the ladies who works as a steward told me that there have been times when patrons would quickly leave their rooms in the middle of the night because something scared them. She said that she had witnessed items move while cleaning a room, but that's all. It didn't seem to bother her at all. New Orleans is a haunted city, and anyone who lives here knows that to be a fact. But this is my home and I plan to live here as long as I can.
I was in New Orleans last weekend for Mardi Gras, and for the last day of our trip, Wednesday, we went sightseeing, ending up at St. Louis Cemetery too. The whole cemetery was pretty thrashed, and falling apart, which I thought made for some pretty sweet photo ops. We came upon one tomb which was missing a brick. So like an idiot, I asked my boyfriend to take a picture of me with my arm inside touching the casket. Almost immediately, I knew I screwed up, because as he was taking the picture, a huge bird flew at me from behind him, landing on the gate not even half a foot from my face, scaring me enough to take my arm out of the hole. At the same time, another bird came from behind me, flying towards him, landing on the gate, you can see in the photo, scaring him enough to put his phone down. We both thought it was kind of weird, but being overly skeptical about the paranormal, we didn't think too much more of it. As we walked down the row and turned the corner, he decided to take a photo of the tomb on the corner. This was the photo taken immediately after the first one, about 45 seconds, and it wasn't until yesterday that I looked at either of them. At the time he took it, neither of us were smoking, but even if we had been, there's still the unexplained discoloration. His phone has never taken any photos with weird shit in it before, or messed up with long exposure, or color glare, or whatever. Anyways, I still wouldn't have paid any attention to any of that, except I've been having the worst luck of my life since we left. 3 separate incidents of car issues, in a brand new car, 2 flats, with no explanation, windshield shattered while driving, nothing hit it and no previous cracks, health issues, food poisoning, and possible bug bite/staph infection that came out of nowhere, came home to all my fish dead, all in separate bowls and were still alive on Thursday. Woke up this morning to both of our phone screens randomly cracked, even though we went to sleep with them completely fine. When I turned on the ceiling fan, all 3 light bulbs inside of it blew at the same time. Isn't electrical. The fan part still works, and other unexplained bad luck events.
In a New Orleans swamp. Sitting up in a tree with my rifle, looking for anything. No animals around, hadn't seen shit all day. Starts to get cloudy, storms a brewin'. Screw this day, I'm going home and getting in my jammies. Hiking back to my buggy, stay crouched and looking for anything I might see on the way back. Screw it, maybe I'll get lucky. On this trail next to this swamp pond, hear a disturbance in the water. Crouch and waddle over to the tall grass, peek through to see what it is. See something gray/greenish on the bank, almost crawling along and near the edge of the water. Don't have my gator license, but what's one little gator? Raise the rifle scope. Wait, what the? Didn't look like any gator Eve ever seen. Elongated arms, long fingers and nails. Can't make out the rest, but I swear it looked like it had a deformed sternum. Step on a twig, god damn it, I'm better than that, and its head jerks up. Heads are weird too, not human but definitely not a gator. Also had black marble eyes, but no nose I could see. Scurries away into the pond swamp, nope my way back to my buggy and speed home. Got stuck coming out of the swamp, felt like I was being watched and I thought I saw something in the trees. Probably just scaring myself, but still. I went from thinking it was some mutant deformed gator to a lizard to a goddamn morbid mermaid for a while. Then I was watching one of those cryptid monster hunter shows and they talked about lizard people. Not the underground society that are our politicians in disguise kind, but apparently there is a more animalistic predator kind that lives in swamps and sewers. Almost choked on my sandwich when they showed it, but that's the best explanation I have. Never told anyone, and I've been back and found a half-eaten animal along the swamp.
Went to New Orleans the first time with my family when I was young, around 14 or 15. The spookiest thing I experienced then was when we took the paddleboat ride down the river and stopped at the battlefield a little bit down the way. I had been having a lovely time until we walked around and I got this really heavy, horrible feeling almost physically weighing me down. The rest of my family was alright and having a good time taking pictures and reading plaques, so I headed back to the plantation house by the boat alone. The feeling kept getting stronger and made me nauseated and dizzy while my head felt like it was imploding. One of the guides from the plantation house noticed me struggling at a distance and came to get me, asking me if I was alright. After getting me in shade, she said some people have really bad reactions to whatever's out there and I wouldn't be the first to be weakened so much by the battlefield's negative energies. I don't remember what that place is called, but I think it's technically the last battle of the Civil War even though it was fought after the war ended since communications at the time were slow as hell. I experienced spooky things in New Orleans the times I've returned years later, but they are more related to intoxication than anything paranormal.
I wrote this up a while ago but I never posted it. I'm not looking for answers or anything, but I'd like to hear X's opinion on what happened. I'm wondering if this had to do with my anxiety at that time or if it's something about New Orleans. Note that this was very nearly a year before Hurricane Katrina. In late August of 2004 my hometown was in the direct path of Hurricane Francis. When she was off the Florida coast she was a Category 3 and my parents decided to evacuate. My family lives on the east coast of Florida and decided to make a vacation of it and drive 10+ hours to New Orleans. Point 5. New Orleans is a great city, full of good food and some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. My mom, brother, and I did most of the sightseeing. My dad, uncle, and aunt seemed to be doing their own thing. The second night there, I learned my uncle was having an episode. He's bipolar, and the impending threat, the evacuation, and the radically different environment was enough to set him off. His usual doctors were unreachable, so we were left to deal with it alone. My uncle was convinced someone was coming for him, that he was the one, that time was being manipulated, he was being cut off from the real world, etc. He looked crazy too. I remember worrying the hotel staff would kick us out if they saw him. Fortunately, the hotel staff were sympathetic. They let us move rooms and kept us away from other guests. It was honestly one of the most tumultuous times of my life. I was nervous about the hurricane, nervous about my uncle, and I couldn't take comfort in my family, who were also nervous and stressed out. I believe I experienced a time lapse on the fourth night. My dad had decided to walk the dog with my uncle, just to get him away from everyone. Originally, my aunt was going along, but I was dying to get out of the hotel and pleaded with her to let me go instead. My uncle isn't dangerous to others when he's having an episode. Despite his crazy talk, he's never physically hurt someone during an episode. I thought I'd be safe, and my dad shared my opinion and took me along. The walk started uneventfully. My uncle spouts some crazy shit, but nothing too loud or too out of the ordinary for him. He started to tell my dad and I how often he does this, and how long he's been doing it. At the time I thought he was talking about walking the dog, but looking back I believe he may have experienced some other lapses during his episode. I wasn't paying him a lot of attention, I was just walking and looking at the city. After a while I realized I was alone, but I didn't freak out, I just kept walking. I wasn't really thinking about where I'm going or why I'm alone. I was watching the scenery pass me by. Though I was aware of my surroundings, I wasn't fully conscious. Despite having never visited New Orleans before, I managed to make my way back to the hotel on my own. There I was greeted by 2 cop cars and my hysterical mother. I had been missing for well over an hour. My father said he didn't know how it happened, and he didn't realize I'd even wandered away. Somehow we'd all split up without realizing it. My uncle returned first with the dog and my dad showed back up shortly after him, at which point my family went off the deep end. The hotel staff helped them search the hotel. My dad ran through the streets looking for me, and then they called 911. Of course, I had to talk to every cop and hear the same spiel about how it was unsafe, I shouldn't wander, and I really worried about my family. At the same time, my parents had to explain my uncle's strange behavior. Product: don't Baker act someone when they're out of their resident state. They'll be released pretty quickly no matter how crazy they are. My dad doesn't talk about it, and my uncle doesn't remember much of that time, but I believe they experienced something similar. My dad would have surely noticed I was missing before returning to the hotel. He's not spacey like that. It's very unusual behavior for him, and it was unusual for me as well. I never wandered off as a kid, and at that time I was in my teens. I've visited a lot of cities, so I know to stick close. It's like the 3 of us blanked out, wandered around the city, and all ended up back in the same place. So that's it. The family doesn't talk about, and to be fair, we had a lot of shit to deal with at that time. When we finally did get home, we found that the metal roof over our porch had been torn to shreds among other damage. Then about a week after we returned, we got hit by Hurricane Jean. My missing incident sort of fell to the wayside. I still think about it though. I wonder if something has led me around the city. Even if I had blanked out and wandered, I would have ended up lost. The city itself felt very dreamy. It's something I also feel in Key West. I remember feeling cut off from the real world like my uncle had said, though that may have been because I was cut off from my normal life.
I have a story. It's more me recounting a story I was told, but that's a story anyway. I went to New Orleans for a week for spring break back in '09. Stayed in the French Quarter in a hostel. One of my roommates was this crazy Creole dude who was put out of home during Katrina. He sold pewter charms that he made himself in clay molds. This is actually his story that he told me. He used to live in the Mojave Desert with a Mexican guy named Jaro who worked at a nearby meat packing plant. They stayed on opposite ends of a mobile home and split the bills, college buddies or something. Anyway, he'd see Jaro tossing and turning a lot in bed, and he eventually woke the dude up in the middle of the night sobbing. The guy asked Jaro what was wrong, and they were good friends, so Jaro just up and said, "We cut up a silver man at the plant today." They were a meat packing plant that got products from a lot of people across the country, so they'd get specialty goods. This one was a request from people who just brought in the carcass and had it cut up. A silver man, that's all he kept saying, like, he was a man, but he was silver and he had a long face. Jaro said he kept seeing the silver man looking at him. My roomie didn't quite believe that kind of thing happened, and talked about calling the police or something, but Jaro just said he'd go sleep in his car. It kept up for a few months, and Jaro quit his job and stopped paying bills and buying stuff since he couldn't sleep well. At this point my roomie just gave me one of his pewter charms, pick-related, sorry about the quality. He just told me to hold on to it while he finished his story. I remember a lot of what he said verbatim, Before he continued he said, "You hold that there, keep it good. I'm fixing to tell you a bad thing." My roomie got a job at the same plant since Jaro had left an opening, but he noticed that Jaro started to sleep in a lot. My roomie described sleep paralysis, like it's a morning that you don't got to move in your blood, but it ain't morning yet. Apparently he started to wake up with it a lot towards the end of the time he lived with Jaro. He got really distant towards the end of the story and started asking like, "Wasn't the bit about not moving weird enough? The Silver Man?" I told him no and goaded him into continuing. He licked his bottom lip and just went, "Yep." The last time he saw Jaro he was sleeping on top of his blankets. He woke up with sleep paralysis again, looking right at Jaro's bed. I was feeling like I was shaking, here? Right in my bones like, but I didn't move. I don't remember how he said that exactly. His dialect wasn't quite thick or Rasta or anything I really had the ability to identify, so I just call it Creole. So he was sleeping on his side, staring at Jaro, feeling more wrong than any other thing, wrong like your pet just died, like you have a dog and it just up and poofed. That's when he pointed at the charm in my hand. Now, his head wasn't so long, but that was Jaro. If it weren't Jaro, that Silver Man he chopped up and sleeped in his bed. Sit up and look at me and my eyes don't even gotta close, but I don't wanna look at him. He's got a scary face. Apparently Jaro or the Silver Man or whatever just got up and left his trailer. Then he just looked away and said stuff like, "Yeah, that Jaro. That's alright." Spooks me to this day.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.